And welcome to Parenting Beyond Belief, which is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, an educational nonprofit dedicated to the separation of religion and government, and also promoting positive atheism. This particular show, Parenting Beyond Belief, is a show for folks who are raising free thinkers in a religious world. We discuss parenting, share our experiences, share stories, and take phone calls from parents who have questions, thoughts, or experiences about parenting in a secular way. Our regular show times are on the second and fourth Saturdays of each month at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you're watching us on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. We have, at this point, 550 subscribers, y'all, which is awesome. And we want that number to go up. Yay. And if you're listening to us on Spreaker, please click that orange subscribe button. If you like what we do and want to support us with actual money, you can go to Patreon and become a patron, which would be wonderful. We have two hosts other than myself today. We have Mandisa Thomas, who is on the phone. Say hello,
everyone.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hi, Mandisa.
Welcome to this episode. Hello, Claire.
Hi. Founder and president of Black Nonbelievers and the 2018 Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association Person of the Year Award. That is quite possibly the longest award title ever.
Yes.
Yes. And it sounds just awesome. Okay, so Noelle George over here is our special host today. She found her people in the secular Houston community and started volunteering for secular activist causes in 2008. Noelle founded the Mothers Beyond Belief Facebook group. She has also briefly served as co-host for a previous version of Parenting Beyond Belief podcast and has dabbled in various other projects, including, this is super important, if you're a parent, you will super appreciate this, working to provide child care at conferences. Yeah, girl. Noelle's activism has taken many other forms, traveling around the country, consulting with and speaking to local secular groups, working with national secular organizations, presenting at local and national conferences, and appearing on radio shows and podcasts, including Ask an Atheist, the Gaytheist Manifesto. She was the first ever guest on Gaytheist Manifesto. I am so jealous of that. And the Friendly Atheist. So that is all of our introductory stuff. So let me talk about today's little parenting thingy. I do a parenting thingy at the beginning of each show. And what I'm going to talk about today is the four styles of parenting. There are four types, and this was originally formulated by Diane Baumrind. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in the 1960s. And there's authoritarian or disciplinarian. So that's what most super religious households are going to be like. Permissive or indulgent. So a little too letting kids do what they want to do. Uninvolved and authoritative, which is what research has shown again and again to be the very best way to parent children. What are they? What do these mean? And see if you recognize yourself in some of these. By the way, nobody fits neatly into any one of these boxes. If you are a pure authoritative parent, good on you. But I've tried, and I slip into authoritarian sometimes, and I've done permissive at times, and I don't think I've ever done uninvolved, but at least I would never hope I've done uninvolved. But anyhow, authoritarian parenting is the disciplinarian. If you believe this, check this out. Do you believe children should be seen and not heard? I was raised in that household. When it comes to rules, you believe it's my way or the highway? I was raised in that household. You don't take your child's feelings into consideration. I was raised in that household. This is all very familiar to me. So there's strict discipline with little negotiation, and punishment is super common. Sometimes physical, unfortunately. Communication is mostly one way, parent to child, and rules are usually not explained, which is also true, oddly. You just don't do stuff because you're not supposed to do stuff. Parents with this style are typically less nurturing, which was, again, my case and the way I was raised. And expectations are high with limited flexibility. The other extreme is permissive parenting. Ask yourself if this is what you sound like. You don't ask your child about school or homework. You rarely know where your child is or who they are with. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your child is? You remember those commercials, y'all? You're old enough to remember those.
I do.
Yes, right? Yeah. And it was funny because I'd be sitting watching TV with my parents and they'd both look at me like, yeah, I know where my kid is. Okay, so you don't spend much time with your child. So communication is open, but these parents let children decide for themselves rather than giving direction. Parents in this category tend to be warm and nurturing, and expectations are typically minimal or not set by the parent at all. Uninvolved parenting, this is another not so good one. They give children a lot of freedom and generally stay out of their way. It is either due to one of three things. It's either a conscious decision, like, oh, I was so restricted as a child that I'm going to let my children be free spirits sort of thing, and that's kind of a stereotype exaggeration, but... Right. And some folks are just less interested in parenting. That would certainly describe a lot of how I was parented. Okay. And sometimes they're just unsure what to do. And I think we've all been there sometimes, like, oh, gosh, what's the right thing to do? Because we're all making this up as we go. None of us walk into parenting being experienced at it. We're just doing what we can. So you may set rules, but you rarely enforce them. You don't give out consequences very often, and you think your child will learn best with little interference from you. No particular disciplinarian style lets a child mostly do what they want, probably out of lack of information and sometimes lack of caring. And communication is limited. They offer little nurturing, too, and there are few or no expectations of the children. And then there's what has been shown over and over again to be the very best one, and that's authoritative parenting. These are parents that are reasonable and nurturing and set high, clear expectations. Children with parents who demonstrate this style tend to be self-disciplined and think for themselves. Why? Because you explain the rules and why they are what they are. It's super effective to let people know why they're doing something and explain the effect that your behavior is having on someone else and developing that empathy. We are all born with empathy, contrary to what you may have been told. Science has shown that infants tested as early as 3 months old have empathy. It's there. But there's variation in it in the first place, and second of all, it needs to be developed. So you're going to have empathy for your own quite easily, right. And this is often the more conservative attitude. They have tremendous empathy for their own, but none for the other. And so if you want to develop your empathy beyond that, the child's empathy beyond that to the other, that's more progressive sort of parenting and lifestyle. And so that empathy often has to be developed because we are social animals and we naturally tend to create us and them sorts of groups. So.
Right, and if you have more in common with someone, then it can be easier to empathize. But if you have less in common, then sometimes that's a skill that needs to be developed and, figure out, okay, what do we have in common? How can I empathize with this person?
Right on. So there's a lot more work in this kind of parenting. You put effort into creating and maintaining a positive relationship with your child. It's not about being friends or buddies with them. That's not what this is. It's about being that positive safety net in their lives. You explain reasons behind your rules, like I already said, and you enforce rules and give consequences that make sense. So if I don't do the thing, putting me in my room or spanking me or something, that has nothing to do with the thing, and I'm not going to learn anything from it. But if I break something and my parent requires me to pay the person for the expense of repairing it or whatever, that's a normal consequence. That makes sense. And really, consequences shouldn't be punishment so much as life lessons and parenting folks are getting more and more away from discipline at all, and it should all be about teaching and learning and finding ways to make experiences experiences. You don't put a kid, an infant or a toddler in a room full of china and tell them to sit still. You create what's called a yes environment. Do you want to play with that? Yes, you can. Anything they can reach, they can play with. So that makes it easier. And it's not that they will never learn to not play with china and break it. Right. They don't have the ability to discern that at that age. And so just don't even bother. It's
setting them up for success.
Yeah,
you're setting them up for success.
Right,
so you're not putting them in situations where they're too tired or they're too hungry to be able to follow instructions if they need to. So it's our job as parents to set our kids up for success and teach them, when they do have an obstacle or a challenge that they have to deal with, it's not that things can be perfect all the time. We can't always be somewhere and they'll be well fed and they'll be well rested and they'll do what they need to do, but excuse me, it's about optimizing those conditions, I think,
and listening when they're not quite right and then solving it together. When my boy was 2 years old, he was a super active kid. He was never one to sit still and do anything for any period of time. We would go home to my parents' home, and my mother had lots and lots of china at floor level. And I started to pick it up and put it up where he couldn't get at. And she said, well, haven't you taught him the meaning of the word no? God almighty. I just didn't even know where to begin with that. So that's my parenting style, which was more authoritative, and she was the authoritarian, and that's why I didn't often let her see my children. So the rules are clear and the reasons behind them are explained. Communication is frequent and appropriate to the child's level of understanding. That is one that we're constantly learning about. If a child is old enough to ask about something, they're old enough for the answer, and you just answer it with as simple terms as possible. And then if they want more information, they can chew on it and come back or whatever. But information is a fine thing to give children, and authoritative parents are nurturing. What is your parenting style? Does it fit neatly in one of those boxes? I'd be very surprised. And there are other factors in how your children turn out, not just your style of parenting. The child's personality very much has an influence on this thing, and peer influences and people outside of your home who may have had an influence on the child. There are many, many things that influence this. So any one solid parenting advice thing, no, there's no one size fits all. But these are things to consider. This particular article talked about helicopter parenting and free-range parenting. These are two new types of parenting, newish, I guess. And one is where you are authoritative, but a little bit too much in their space and a little bit too micromanaging. Not letting them fall, not letting them climb the tree, whatever. I see parents who don't want their children to climb trees, and I personally don't understand that. Children should climb trees. And then there's free-range parenting, and that's where you give them a little more, a little freer boundaries than maybe most people do. To me, though, and I'm going to check in with you, Mandisa, and Noelle on this, free-range parenting is kind of how our generation was raised. And I think that a lot of the reason why you have to name it and do it now is because so many people are watching all the time. They're going to call CPS on you if you send your kid to the park unsupervised. And I don't wonder that free-range parenting should have a little more. Am I right? Am I wrong? What do y'all think? Mandisa, you want to
go? So first, when it came to I just have to make a comment on the parents who don't want their kids climbing trees. And I do think that to an extent that should be allowed, but also the parents will have to pay those bills if the child hurts themselves.
Oh, yeah.
So I can understand a certain level of caution in not wanting them to do too much. But, people need to think about that. And, of course, it's nice to have these really, really good, good progressive parenting styles. But of course, depending on, and we have to consider income levels for people too, that it's a privilege to be able to consider some of these parenting styles. And I think that's something that should be taken into some consideration. Not saying that they shouldn't be at all, but going back to the free range, I remember my brothers and I were what were called latchkey kids. When my mother went to work and when she went to school, my brothers and I, even though we had a large family in our neighborhood, we still, went when we got off the bus at school or when we came home from school, we were by ourselves quite a bit. And it wasn't that we didn't know what to do, but there was a period of time where we had to stay at home by ourselves because our mother was busy going to school and working. And so, I think that, we had a bit of an intelligence level to know that there were certain people that we should not let in the house or in the apartment, and that there were certain people that we shouldn't be talking to. And it was very common where we grew up too. But, it was also, you're right, there are some, nowadays there are some, I think that children do need to have some sense of independence. And I think that, the authoritative style can allow for that. It doesn't mean that, definitely they should know what those consequences are, but to give the ability, to guide your child's ability to be able to make certain decisions. And like you said, explain what the rules are, what could happen if not, and not trying to scare them either, because there are a lot of parents who try to scare their kids into not doing stuff. And I think, explaining what, could possibly happen is quite important. But I do think that, it depending on the child's level of comprehension. I think that there are some kids who, and then I would say that mine fall in that category, they are able to stay for a certain period of time in the house by themselves, and they'll be okay. The house won't burn down. Nothing else will be seriously, damaged, because we do try to explain things to them as much as possible, and we think that they have a good level of understanding, and that goes to not just what we're teaching them or guiding them, but also how they can comprehend and learn for themselves. And so, I think that there are some of the old ways that work and some of the old ways that don't. And I try to incorporate that as some of the older and sort of, newer styles of parenting. Of course, taking all information and evidence into consideration. We definitely are not a disciplinary household. There are consequences when the kids do something wrong or they mess up. But discipline is a last resort. It doesn't mean that it isn't frustrating, but certainly that is a last resort there. But I think. Yeah, I think there were a lot of things that we were able to do more, or we had to do on our own when we were growing up. And of course, some of those things seem to be, discouraged now. But I think I take some things, I take the information and see how we might be able to implement some things with also gauging where your children are, gauging where our children are. Yeah. And I think that that's probably, I think a lot of the things that I experienced growing up definitely helped shape how I raised my children, and being able to take what worked and what didn't work and turn it around. And it has been really helpful for me.
Paying attention. There you go. So, Mandisa, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier in what you said, but first I wanted to get Noelle's thoughts on what we just talked about here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking while you were describing the styles and how the free range parenting and the what was the other one? The helicopter parenting. I was actually thinking about how those are newer parenting pieces and why those styles have kind of emerged recently, and how when I was younger, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and it was very much authoritarian parenting was mostly the thing. And so that was most of what I saw growing up. But I was able to see some examples of authoritative parenting. And I was thinking that as technology has come into play and we have all these changes with people being able to see and record things that people do all the time, I was wondering if that's kind of promoted helicopter parenting a little bit, because if you're constantly kind of worried that somebody's going to be recording you, and you're not paying attention to your kid, or, also this kind of tendency to, call CPS or call the police or whatever, I can kind of see how maybe if somebody was nervous about that, that would develop. And then, of course, the free range parenting would kind of, be a counter to that and kind of emerge in addition, or otherwise, for parents who don't want to do the helicoptering, but we need something to call it, because like you said, otherwise people will think that it's just kind of unsupervised or whatever. So I was thinking about how and why those would have emerged as not necessarily different styles, but different types of reactions to the way that our society is. And so, yeah.
Right. So Mandisa, you mentioned privilege playing a part in this, and I'd like to parse that a little bit more. I know that I can think of ways that privilege plays into that, but I want to hear from you.
Sure. So there tends to be and I'm just going to say this right out.
Right on.
There tends to be a certain way that, white parents may do things as opposed to what black parents would do, or parents who live, or people of color. And I think that, there are some communities that have a bit more access to information and a bit more access to be able to do certain things with their kids. Now, I was one of those kids who grew up not having much. Me and my brothers, we didn't have much, but, my mom kind of pushed the envelope a bit when it came to progressive, even though I wouldn't even say it was disciplinary, it was abusive. But I would say that when it comes to certain things that certain kids have access to, there is often there are some kids who are disproportionately affected. Or when you look at certain communities or working class communities and what some of these kids may or may not have access to, and also considering what may be going on in their households. It doesn't mean that, I think that there are other factors that should be taken into consideration that may be socioeconomic and also institutional.
Okay.
That some parents may or may not have access to. And this is something that we just can't, we just can't ignore it. So that, so sometimes it seems like there's just like a black or white answer,
right?
Or black or white, or you should be doing this with your kid. Well, if the parent has to work, if they're a single parent and they're working 2 jobs, for example, it may be a bit more difficult for them to, to provide a certain style of parenting because they're trying to provide for their home. And it doesn't mean that there are certain things, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be trying to be the best parents possible, but understanding that, there are certain factors that can play into why certain parents may or may not be able to do certain things with their kids. Sometimes it looks like there are some that are sitting on a mountain high judging what some parents do.
Oh, yes, we've all been judged.
And I think we should, and I think we should, I think, there are, we should be, I think there should be a conscious effort, because the average, sometimes, the average person who is looking to see how they're going to feed their kids, trying to throw all of these statistics and, information at them about what they should be doing, may not necessarily help. So showing that empathy the same way we would show empathy to, we want to show empathy to our children.
Yes.
So there's some institutional factors, and I know that there's always a running joke about, like I said, what some white parents would do and what black parents.
Oh yeah,
would do.
I've heard
white parents would do the timeout.
Right. Oh, timeout I think is abusive. So yeah. So I have a question. We're both just champing at the bit to say something here to you, Mindy, and ask you questions. Go ahead, Noelle. Go. You first.
Well, I was just going to say that for me, I think that what Mandisa said is I can think of how examples of privilege in my life that have allowed me to, to change my style of parenting, because it is very hard when you've grown up with one style of parenting. Often that can be your default. Like, that's what you've seen, so that's what you know. And for me, it was the authoritarian, and there were different things that happened, and I have gone to counseling and done, worked through some of the coping mechanisms that I developed due to that style of parenting, so that I can then, be a better parent and change that style of parenting for my daughter. So I've known since well before, and I don't know if we said, but I have a 7-year-old daughter. But I've known well before I was going to be a parent that I wanted to do things differently in a lot of ways than my parents. But it's very difficult to change those patterns. It's very difficult to change those emotional reactions. And if you don't have access to insurance for counseling, or to some of the resources that are available, and obviously different resources work for different people, so I'm not saying that counseling is the only way to work through some of these things, but I know that having access to it for me was necessary to be able to find some different ways to parent and find some different reactions. Like if my daughter yells at me, I was yelled at and I don't react to that very well. So working through that, I think is extremely important. And the more resources that you have to do that, the easier it is. So I guess that's just kind of an example or an illustration of what Mandisa is saying. Does that make sense, I guess?
Mandisa?
Yeah, it does. And let me just, before, I know you wanted to say something, Claire.
Let's go. I want you to talk.
I actually, I read a book that helped me a lot. It was called Toxic Parents, and I actually belong to the group on Facebook, because there are a lot of adults who are still dealing with their abusive childhoods. And sometimes those abuse does cross economic lines. So there are people who were raised in affluent or very, or they've had privilege, or they've come from, they were well off and they were still abused. And so that was something that I had to realize and understand when I grew up, was that it wasn't just because I came from a working class environment that this was happening, that it does crosses racial lines, it crosses economic lines. But so I just wanted to say that does, I've been able to see that, excuse me.
Yeah, and not that it doesn't, but that, my main point, just to be clear, is that it can be easier to work through some of the traumas and change, your behaviors if you have access to. Facebook is great, that having access to that group, having a computer, but if you don't have access to the internet, or if you don't have access to, whatever resources that can help get you out of those patterns, then it's that much harder to turn around and parent, differently, intentionally.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's a tough one. Oh boy, since you both have talked, I've been thinking of other things. If you're watching and you want to join this conversation or have a question or a comment, please call. I never remember the stupid phone number. 512-565. Spirit, speak to me. What's the rest of the phone number? 686 512-686-0279. Right. The reason I have trouble remembering it is because it's really similar to my phone number, and I don't want to mess it up. So 512-686-0279. Please do call. We want to hear from you. And so, okay, back to what y'all were saying. The privilege thing. Yeah, it takes time, it takes money, it takes resources to change the way you parent if the way you were parented was bad. And I have had to put a lot of resources into discovering the way and creating the way I wanted to parent versus how I was parented.
And I don't know if, can I just...
Go ahead.
Well, I try to avoid using like bad or good, especially with my daughter. Like, something is unhealthy or something is healthy, but, I a lot of times growing up was told, be good or be a good girl or do good or good job. And so kind of avoiding that way of classifying things that, even if you use an unhealthy style of parenting or a less healthy style of parenting, that doesn't mean, that you're bad or that, your kids are going to turn out bad or anything. It's, we just do the best that we can. Yeah.
Right. So, clearly, I think I turned out pretty okay. But I'm going to go ahead and say the way I was raised was wrong, because when I have the great privilege of having friends who are child rearing experts and parenting experts, and anytime that I would ask them, "What do I do? I'm pulling my hair out," and it was always the exact opposite of how I was parented, always. So I'm pretty clear that how I was raised was very wrong. So as far as privilege goes, let me see. How are we as people? I know the joke that you're talking about, Mandisa. I wanted to acknowledge that. There are the jokes that the comedians tell where the white parent is being so permissive. Oh, Timmy, we talked about this. We're not going to do this, right? And on, and no actual consequence ever comes. It's just talking and being nice and all that stuff. And it's ridiculous. That's not the best way of parenting, truly. And then the people of color comedians that I always watch, they're always talking about, just give them a smack on the butt sort of thing. And it's been shown unequivocally that that's not a good way to parent. So there's got to be something in between there, obviously, and that seems to be authoritative parenting. How do we get there?
So I was just going to say today I was out shopping earlier, and I was in the store, and there was a Black woman who was talking to her children just horrendously. And she, said, "I'm going to beat your A if you don't stop." And that just made me cringe because, first of all, it did remind me of my childhood. And so I think, and it's almost like in many Black households, like the spanking and the beating is like a source of pride, which really does make me cringe. And I know it's not just, I know it isn't just exclusive to the Black community, but we tend to hear it a lot. And it's, there's a whole institutional aspect there that we don't have enough time to get into today. But but I do think that, as times are changing, as well as the mix, because we live in a pretty diverse neighborhood here in Fayetteville in Georgia. And there's different types of parents, and there's different types of Black parents. And I think many of them are, doing a more like authoritative, style of parenting. But then I've also seen other Black parents who have done the, uninvolved, who, they seem to not have cared at all about what their children did. And so it's an interesting mix there that we see, and I think kind of where I think we do kind of get to the, we can help break that down by showing that, first of all, it isn't just exclusive to one community. That, there are certainly white parents who do a lot of the same, they employ a lot of the same abusive tactics that other that Black parents do, and or other or people from other ethnicities.
Yeah.
And I think continuing to talk about this really does help, because I do talk with my children a lot. I don't tell them everything that I've been through, but they do know that I will tell them, I'm not feeling well right now, or I'm angry. I'll communicate with them what I'm feeling, and I also try to, I also gauge how they're feeling, and whether or not it's the right time to discuss certain things. It doesn't cost us much to really step back and reflect.
Amen.
Even with all of this, it does not. And, just taking the time because as parents, and especially as mothers, we are often the last on the self-care list or the care list.
Yeah.
Parents, or whether it's us, everybody seems to come before us. And that becomes very difficult when there is, a responsibility on our shoulders. And it can become frustrating, but this is why I do my best to communicate and let my children know that, hey, this may not be the right time for me. This may not be the right time for you. So we'll come back to it another time.
Right. So, that space to breathe instead of trying to deal with it when you're all aroused emotionally. It's just not wise. Right.
Yeah, I think our kids seeing us set those boundaries for ourselves and seeing, that's probably a big motivator for me when I do my own self-care, is because I know that my daughter is going to see that. And she's going to see me setting that example. She's going to see how I do it, and she's going to learn from me. That's how kids learn, right? From watching their parents and watching people around them. So, if anybody is kind of hesitant about the self-care, just think you're doing it for your kid. You're doing it so your kid can. That's obviously not the only reason, but our kids will see us as mothers or us as parents, and they'll see how we set boundaries, like Mandisa said, how she, shows her emotions or shares her emotions with her kids. Like, that's okay for kids.
Appropriately, right?
Yeah.
Because in my house, anger was super prevalent, but it was abusive. And my father was the only one who could be angry. And then and he was scary angry. He was terrifying. In his old age, when as he aged and paid attention, he realized what he had done and he apologized. And that's the other thing we can do as parents that is so important, is when you screw up, acknowledge it and apologize. It makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference.
And I think pretending like we haven't screwed up is one of the. I see that as a kind of authoritarian type.
Oh, it's gaslighting
style. You know, it's like I have to be seen as the authority figure, and I need to maintain my my power. And if I apologize, that's going to make the kid see me as less authoritarian. So I cannot apologize. So I think that's really one of the examples of. The authoritative parenting style that that's a huge difference from authoritarian.
Right on. So,
and I was thinking, did you have something you wanted to move on to, or
no? Go ahead. What one?
I wanted to talk, when you were talking about the styles at the beginning, I wanted to talk a little bit about uninvolved or
uninvolved parent.
I was thinking about that in terms, and since we're talking about kind of diversity and diverse, socioeconomic statuses or areas, I really think that the uninvolved, it reminds me of, like, I have depression. So when you're depressed, especially if you're in a lower economic category, or I don't know what the best word is to use, but then you might not have as easy access to mental health treatment. So it's not just about, I'm
don't care. You might not be able.
Yeah, or like I'm going to counseling just because I want to adjust my parenting style. Like there might be mental health issues. There might be physical health issues that people are trying to deal with. So I do think it makes a lot of sense not to kind of judge any of these styles as necessarily, parents who do that are bad. There's always mitigating factors that come into play.
We have a caller, ladies, who wants to talk about Harambe and who is to blame for the incident. And Pine Snake, I've talked to you before on other calls and stuff, and I enjoy talking with you. We've even interacted, really a lot, I think, on Discord, and that's great. But can you come up with a parenting question, please? The whole Harambe thing was awful, and it's been turned into this ridiculous meme, and so go back and think about maybe a parenting thing, and then we can go from there, maybe. How about that? All right, so back to what we were talking about, ladies, because are y'all in a mood for a call? It's a parenting question. The person is telling me it is indeed a parenting question. Okie dokie. Here we go, ladies. Hey, Pine Snake.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, and you? I hope, did you hear my whole diatribe? And I apologize since it was actually a parenting question.
No, I totally understand.
Okay, right on.
It's basically, we've been discussing it in Discord, and there's an argument on whether the parents were to blame or whether the zoo should have had better safety precautions in place.
Oh.
And my idea is it was just accidents happen, but some people are blaming the parenting methods, and I thought it kind of related to what you opened with at the beginning of the different methods used.
Right. You're absolutely right. Yes. Here's the thing. People who are blaming the parents have never, they probably haven't been parents, and if they've been parents, they've been incredibly fortunate because accidents happen. You take your eye off the kid for 10 seconds and the most horrendous thing can happen. Or you can be extraordinarily lucky and nothing happens. I could go on about that because we've all been there. Mandisa, you want to chime in here?
I agree, and also that had me had me thinking back to the to the little boy who was snatched by the alligator or crocodile in Florida not long after the Harambe incident happened. I mean, surely in the lagoon, it said no swimming, and the parents were they were all waiting in the water, and I think the little boy just got away, and then the alligator came up and snatched him. I mean, it like you said, you turn away for 1 second, and something pretty, and unfortunately that, of course, if you're snatched by an alligator, chances are you are not going to make it. That's gone.
Yeah, my heart goes out. That's just horrendous.
Yeah. I think the young man in the case of Harambe was fortunate, and I am sad that that he was put down as a result, because I don't think that the animals or the mammals aren't at fault for doing what they do. But I really, and again, like you said, there are. I know my middle Isaiah. He's 13 now. When he was 2 or 3 years old, he was extremely energetic and rambunctious, and he would get up and just start running. And it was rough at times with him.
My first was like that.
You just could not. Sometimes it was almost like you almost couldn't take him in public. Yeah. Because he was very friendly. He would talk to you, but he would run all over the place. And so sometimes, and then when kids cry, in public, and sometimes I can empathize with the parents, but sometimes I'm like, make them stop. But I understand how difficult it can be, and so, like you said, you turn away for one, especially if a child is curious enough, So there's not to do that whole all sides thing, but there are certain. That's kind of that's kind of hard to gauge unless you know something specifically about the parent. But like you said, Claire, children can get away from you at any time. And because I remember years ago, there were some children who snuck into Prospect Park and got into the polar bear cage. And, I can only, you can guess what happened there. And it was extremely unfortunate, but you can't say that the parent was necessarily at fault or to blame.
Yeah, they do have minds of their own.
Yeah, sometimes they do. And it's like, oh, gosh, there are some horrible consequences that come along with that.
Yeah. And then here's one of the things that my son was that kid who would run and get into things before I could do anything. And I strongly considered getting one of those leashes.
I did.
But I wish I'd had the guts to do it because it would have simplified my life so much. But I was, concerned about judgment from people who say you're treating your child like a dog and so forth. And you just can't win. There's always going to be somebody who judges you.
You can't win. And for us, if somebody had seen us in the airport with a leash, there was so much that they didn't know about us. We lived internationally. We were in airports a lot. My daughter was a runner. Has never met a stranger. She'll go up to anyone. And so, and I would travel often with her by myself. So there's, and for us, it was kind of, it was something that may not have been completely necessary, but made things a lot easier, made me worry a lot less.
It's a self-care thing there.
Yeah, it was kind of a self-care thing. And, being non-religious, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about judgment or anything, but, it can be hard to know that about the jokes and about the things that people say about kids on leashes. But, when you're a parent, you do what you have to do. So that was the right thing for us. But I really wanted to kind of say that in these cases, the alligator or the leash or any other thing, kids crying in the supermarket, somebody a kid melting down, we don't know what happened. Like even if there was video, I don't remember if there was video of either of the two, the alligator incident or the Harambe incident, but even if there is video
of Harambe, that I remember.
Okay, so and even if there is,
also another of orangutan as well.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
We only see those moments. We don't see what happened right before. We don't see what happened earlier in the day. We don't see, what those parents are like. And, I know we don't want to be necessarily, there are cases where there is neglect and there are cases where there is negligence, but really, for me, I don't feel like that's a decision that I can make with the information that I have. So I feel like, I'm going to leave it up to the authorities and the people who were there to make sure that if the parents are, or if somebody has done something wrong, that they're going to be held accountable. Now, as we know, that does not always happen in our society. But for me, there's no way for me to know what all the circumstances are. And it's hard enough for those parents to have whatever's happened happen. So I don't feel like I want to, for me, it's kind of empathy. Like, okay, and it's also kind of self-care for me because I, have a lot of other things going on and I don't necessarily want to spend time trying to figure it out when I think there are others who can do that better. So, I have my causes and they're not trying to figure out, judge other parents.
Right. There you go. It's not a cause I need to worry about.
No.
So, Pine Snake, I got a tough one for you. There are those incidences where people forget children in hot cars and they die. You've heard about those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that? I have strong opinions on that. So, anybody else want to go? Yeah.
I think when you leave any living creature in a hot car, it's negligent.
I don't think they do it on purpose. I think it's when they forget the child in the car.
Which would stop it being actual murder.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let me just chime in here for a second. If you're a parent and you have parented such a way that you can always remember everything, good on you. And I'm not just talking about your child. So when I was, from the time my son was born until 5 years later when my daughter was 3, I didn't sleep any more than 2 hours in a row. My son didn't sleep at all, and my daughter slept a normal amount, and my husband was working awful hours. So I was sleep deprived to the point where I always felt drunk. I can understand, I never did it, I can understand, I'm not judging people who have, I can understand how someone could be so freaking fatigued. For me, I had to have a routine or else I'd forget things. If you go just the slightest bit out of your routine, I can see it happening. I would not judge those parents personally because I know the sort of deep, mind-melting fatigue that can come with parenting, and I understand how that could happen. It's not something that anybody would ever want to have happen, but I can understand it.
If I may interject, Claire, there was a case here in Georgia, up in Cobb County not long ago, where the father basically intentionally killed his toddler by leaving him in the car.
That is beyond heinous.
It really is. And I do think that it is always good to, read up on each case, because some of these things are case by case.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I'm talking about the ones who forget a child.
It would have been,
no one would put their child in there. I guess clearly somebody would. Sorry, Mandisa. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. But, I know there are times where I have been very, very, fatigued and just very, but I just know for me, it would have been difficult for me to forget my children no matter where we were. Mm-hmm. I guess because I just have a habit of, making sure that no matter how tired I am, I'm making sure that I am my surroundings and, I am aware of my surroundings at all times. And I know that for some people it isn't, for some people it's a bit more difficult. I have seen some cases where, they've only had, where the parent may have only had one child, and one child can be it's tired. They're tiring enough. Yeah. It can be very, very difficult. But even I found myself wondering sometimes, like, oh my gosh, how could you? Because I don't know. For some reason, when I am in my vehicle, I just have a habit of turning around. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't judge certain parents, especially if they just forget, or because I know there were some instances where a mother was on on an interview trying to find work, or they had no one else to watch their children, and so that one can be tough, and I think that's where having empathy comes in. Mm-hmm. Is that, and there's always so much of a burden placed on the mother. It's the mother's fault that when something happens to the child. Mm-hmm. Never that, or very rarely that the dad has something to do with it. Because in the initial case that I just mentioned, somebody I think he might have been banking on the fact that, sometimes dads forget, or that they're not supposed to be the ones who watch the kid all the time. Maybe it's, it's the mother's fault. So I think there's definitely a disparity there when it comes to, when those things happen.
Yeah, because it's the woman's job to watch the kids. So if something happens to the kids, it's her fault, right? Mm-hmm. So I think parenting styles even have, I think depending on what gender you are, like if you're a mother or father or whatever, the expectations for you are different. And so parenting styles, can like if a mother is an uninvolved parent versus a father is an uninvolved parent, what are the judgments that go along with that? Since we're talking about judgments,
this is true.
I was going to say I have one kid, so when we're talking about kids in hot cars, I think that I was never as tired as you. I don't think. I remember when I was tired, all I could think about and all I wanted to talk about is sleep. Like, how could I get sleep? When would I get sleep? How could I make sure that my daughter would sleep? Like, my whole entire being, when I was that tired, was focused on sleep. Like, that's all I wanted to talk about, is figuring out how to get more sleep. And so, you know, the physical effects that go along with that, as well as kind of the mental and emotional effects that go on to that, along with that, I think it's very understandable that we, you know, will have trouble remembering things. And a lot of the kids in hot car cases that have been a matter of them forgetting is when it seems like it's when they're outside of their routine.
Exactly. That's why I said outside of your routine, and I had to have that routine because I was so bloody tired if I didn't.
Right. And for me, I have this routine of checking behind me when I leave somewhere because I'm worried that I'm going to forget something, because if you live and travel internationally, you may never go back to that place. So I don't want to forget anything.
It's a good habit to develop.
You know, so that habit actually has like been part of my routine, whether I'm, you know, in my car or whether I'm going to somewhere different than I normally go, that, what am I leaving here, you know?
Right.
So I think that helped me. But when you do have one kid, if they're sleeping or not making a lot of noise, you know, just it makes sense. You know, it's horribly tragic, but it makes sense that it could happen.
Yeah. Just thinking about it makes my heart cringe. So Pine Snake, did we cover everything? You got anything else?
Well, actually, just on the leash part. There are leashes that you can get where they've got like a cuddly, fluffy, like teddy bear rucksack on the back.
Yep.
So it just looks like a rucksack with a long lead for children to explore the surroundings in a safe way.
That's what we had, actually. She had this little bear backpack, and it was a monkey. It was a monkey backpack, and the monkey's tail was the leash.
That is brilliant. Oh my gosh!
So it actually,
that would have been awesome.
It was much more aesthetically pleasing than like a harness with a leash, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh, I wish I'd had that.
They're clever.
We let our children pick their own, and they were able to put toys in it and drinks and stuff. They loved it.
Right. Yes.
Sweet. That's awesome. Oh my gosh! I wish I'd had that. Oh God. Oh, the things. I was so excited. I was so exhausted. I really literally felt drunk all the time. And there's science behind it. Since that time, they have discovered that the brain has its own limbic system that only operates when you're asleep. And so it's like having edema that builds up in your brain over time and never really gets released. It's like literally like being drunk. The toxins build up in your brain, and that's similar to being drunk. So being sleep deprived isn't just, oh gosh, I need some sleep. You're really messing up your brain. And since what now?
No, I was saying, I agree.
Right? And since that time, I have zero tolerance for being sleep deprived. I can't do it at all anymore. I become a jellyfish. I can't function. I can't think of words. Nothing. So it clearly has had an impact on me.
I saw an article recently. I think that they were doing sleep studies on rats or mice, and that even just a few hours or a few days of not having enough sleep actually destroyed certain cells in the brain. I don't remember the details, but I know that even recently they're coming up with more information about what happens to the brain cells permanently destroyed from not getting enough sleep. So
when we were all young, sleep was this time waster, and you did everything you could to reduce the hours that you were sleeping, and we didn't know why we were sleeping. Now it's changed. What, Pine Snake, what were you going to say?
No, I did everything I could possibly to get back into bed.
And children, on the other hand, don't want to sleep for anything. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, my daughter says naps are for babies and old people.
Well, I'm an old person. Oh, my gosh. Awesome. Right on. Anything else, Pine Snake?
No, thank you very much. That's answered all my questions.
Oh, thank you so much for calling. Always good to hear from you.
Thank you for calling in.
Take care.
No, you too.
Okay, bye. I'm trying to remember what he and I got into on Discord. It had to do with evolution, but I don't remember now. Anywho, yeah, parenting is hard, y'all. It's really, really hard. Okay, so we need a caller. If you have any questions whatsoever, 512-686-0279. Yes, yay, I got it right. Yay, can I have a prize? Yay. Oh, we were going to tell Christmas stories. Did you have a Christmas story?
Yeah.
Mandisa, you go. Tell us a Christmas story.
Yeah, so, well, I know, Claire, you saw the video with Miles that I posted on Facebook. He's very,
super
very
cute.
much into the holiday spirit. But I remember maybe about, last year, maybe about 2 years ago when we were still at the old house. My boys, I'm one of those parents who did not tell my kids that Santa wasn't real. They figured it out for themselves. And so one year they asked me to bake some cookies for Santa because they believe in a present. And
that's so great. Yes.
I baked cookies and I also typed up a note from Santa.
Right on.
Letting them know to say thanks for the cookies. But then, like the following year, they're like, Mom, we now know that Santa isn't real. And we know that because he doesn't type letters. So
oh, dang.
It's kind of funny.
Smart little stinkers. Yeah. How they figure it out is always interesting. My son figured it out. Yeah, go on. I'll tell you mine. Sorry.
I was saying it was like I think they were like fake mad. They weren't like really mad, but I just thought it was very interesting that they came to me like, yeah, Mom, we know that.
Yeah, because of this very obscure thing. Oh my gosh, had nothing to do with the friends at school telling them or whatever. My son figured it out because he said if the reindeer are pulling the sleigh would be hanging. It doesn't make sense. That was what his deal breaker was. I'm
gravity. Gravity was
all
the
right,
deal
then,
breaker.
Physics major, you are right. And I'm just going to, wow. Okay. So but that's not my Christmas story. I'll tell it. You want to do your Christmas story?
That's so funny because my story is also about kids figuring out Santa. So my daughter's 7, like I said, and she's been saying things to us recently that I know that she's starting to try to work things out. And the funny thing is it's funny that you talked about the note, Mandisa, because earlier this year we were on vacation and she lost a tooth. And so she wrote this note to the tooth fairy and it said, please wake me up when you come, blah, 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 blah. And so I was like, well, I can't just, let her wake up and, the tooth fairy didn't wake me up. So I wrote a note and I said, I'm sorry I can't wake you up. I'm really busy. I have a lot of teeth to pick up tonight. I'm thinking I'm so clever. And she's, 6 at this point, about to turn 7. And the next day, she saw the note and she was like, great. And then she said to her dad, when I wasn't there at one point, she said, the tooth fairy's handwriting looks a lot like Mama's. And I was like,
busted.
Uh-oh. And so what she did is that she lost a tooth and she actually got a bunch of toys and brought them into her bed and stayed awake long enough and waited for me to come in and leave the money. And she caught me. It was like midnight or something. And I came in and I've got my phone and I've got my phone and I've got my money and I'm getting closer to the bed, and she has a loft bed, so I can't really see her up there to see if she's awake or not. So I'm kind of creeping over there and I've got the phone and I go. She waited until I had the money out and I was about ready to put it under the pillow. And she pops up and she's like, "I caught you."
Did you have a heart attack?
I did have a heart attack. I was like, "What's happening?" And so then I'm like trying to do a smooth move with the money behind my back, and I'm like, "Okay, hi, I was just checking on you." She's like, "No, I saw you. I know that you're the tooth fairy and that you are leaving me money." And,
you want them smart, man.
I know.
Wow.
I've heard about Dale's book and how it talks about, having them do experiments and not just telling them outright. So I was like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. You figured it out. You did an experiment and you tested it," trying to kind of reinforce the science mindset. And I said, "I'm so proud of you. You figured it out." And inside I'm like, "Oh my gosh, are we already done with this now?"
Oh.
But, I made a big deal that she figured it out. And we talked about how, this is a thing that parents get to tell their kids and that we don't tell our friends because it's a special thing that, when the kids figure it out, parents get to, celebrate with them and be proud. So anyway, getting back to the Christmas part, you needed all this backstory for the Christmas part. She is starting to test us with Santa Claus. And I was worried about this because I don't think in her 7 years, because we've lived overseas, that we have spent a Christmas at home. I think all of our Christmases on Christmas Day morning, we are somewhere else. So I really pushed for us to stay home this year because I knew that we were running out of time. And so, but she said to me at one point earlier this year, a couple months, she said, "I really like Christmas a lot." And I said, "Why do you like Christmas?" She said, "Because Santa brings presents and Mommy and Daddy don't have to spend any money." And I was like,
we wish.
Yeah, I know. And then she said to me, actually this morning, she said, she's in Girl Scouts. So she said, when can we start selling cookies? And I said, "Well, not until January 5th, because that's the rule." She said, "Well, that's not going to work." I said, "Why not?" She said, "I want to sell cookies to Santa." I was like, why do you want to sell cookies to Santa? She says, "Because he has a lot of elves, and I bet he'll buy like 20 boxes,
Right on.
So I think she's thinking about it a lot, and I knowing her, she's kind of testing to see what the reactions are as she's asking these questions about Santa. So.
Which cookies does she suppose Santa's elves would prefer?
Well, she knows my favorites are the peanut butter patties, so she definitely mentioned those.
All right. Okay.
So,
note to self, peanut butter patties. All right. We have an actual caller, ladies. Let me look and see here. It is Frank, and his best friend is pregnant, and they want him to be an uncle. So, all righty. Hello, Frank. You're on air with Claire, Noelle, and Mandisa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right on.
Hi, Frank.
So what's your question about specifically?
So, specifically, the question is, what resources are there for being a good, quote unquote, uncle or co-parent? Because I just got some news that my best friends are pregnant and they want me to be an uncle, and it's just a whole bunch of excitement and feelings and all kinds of stuff. So, yes.
Oh, just roll around in it. It's such a happy thing. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations
you
on
and your
all.
friends.
Thank you.
Right? Oh my gosh. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm just wondering, so is this kind of going to be more of a regular co-parenting type thing, or is it going to be more of the fun uncle comes every so often and hangs out with the kid, or
It'd probably be just the fun uncle who shows up time to time. I live at a distance, But these people are really important to me, so I kind of would like to make an effort.
Right. Okay.
So now this is Mandisa. So now is there an issue with like the religious aspect? Are they religious and do they know you're atheist, or do you think that would be an issue?
Well, yeah. So they've got some religious angst, and when I found out that they were pregnant, I was just like, well, I can't really keep this a secret. So I kind of came out to them, and they're the first people I've really come out to.
Wow.
Well, since you have that sort of relationship where you feel like you can talk to them about it, that's awesome. That's amazing. And I think the general advice on that sort of thing is, check with the parents, but for you to be honest about where you are when those conversations come up. It's going to be a while. But for now, the advice that I think I can give is they are really going to need food. The first few months, if you can give them food, meal services, stuff like that, the parents will appreciate that beyond words. I was fortunate enough to have some of those, and they are just a godsend. I wish there was another word for that. Because it takes 2 grown people to take care of a newborn infant. It's amazing. And cooking meals, just forget it. What do you got in the refrigerator? Let's dig out some sandwich meat or whatever. So meals are important. As far as the kiddo goes, spending time is a big thing. And even calling on the phone, writing them letters, sending them little things to do like pictures and things like that. Because I'm an honorary aunt to several kiddos, and that's the sort of thing I do. And it is a cherished moniker for me. It means a lot to me, and I work at the relationship. You have to work at the relationship. My aunt and uncle, real aunt and uncles just, they're non-existent. So, and that's how not to do it. So how to do it is to be involved and lots of love, saying, I love you a lot. The kids just eat that up, and yeah. So who else wants to talk?
Well, for me, I know that thinking on my own aunts and uncles, they were the people that I could go to that they were like, they're not your parent. They're an authority figure, but they're not your parent. So as I've become an aunt, I've really tried to make sure that my nieces see me as someone that loves them, someone that they are safe with, and someone that they can trust and that will be there for them if they need anything. So, as I've said, growing up, my family had some issues. I actually stayed with my aunt and uncle for several months when I was in high school during that time. And so I really try to make sure that my nieces know that that I am that person for them, that if they need to talk to someone about, something that they may not feel comfortable talking to their parents about, but they need kind of that authority guidance or that, that older perspective, that I'm going to be that for them. And the other thing that I would say, going with the aunt/uncle role, is that there are going to be things as the child gets older, there are going to be things that their parents do that you would do differently. You're going to notice that. There's going to be ways that they interact with the kid that you would do differently, or that you don't feel, are the most effective. And I think one of the ways to handle that, and this is something that I've thought about a lot in my role as an aunt, is, you don't want to undermine the parents, but it's also good for the children to see a different way of interacting with people. So, I think that if you don't undermine the parents, and if you have trust with the parents, which it sounds like you do, since they're asking you to be uncle, that it allows you to give the child exposure to a different way of doing things or a different way of being. So don't think that you always have to do things exactly as the parents do, but do take the lead from them and watch what they're doing and make sure that you're not undermining or totally counteracting that.
Sure. No, that's good.
Parenting books, if you authoritative parenting books to learn how best to parent. I mean, if you're going to be spending time with a child, you will be, in a sense, parenting it, and knowing the best ways to do that. I had to read up about it. I had to learn because I had no experience with the good stuff. So,
well, another thing you can do now is work on your communication. Because as they get older, it can be challenging to stay calm if they're frustrated, or to know what to do if something happens. And I think, like, you're going to be a role model for the kid. That's part of being an uncle. And so working on your communication, working on being able to express yourself in a healthy way. If you get frustrated or angry or whatever else, that's also going to be great for the child, because it's going to model a different person other than just their parents or whoever else they regularly see. It's going to model that for them.
That is super important. Mandisa?
I agree 100%. And I do think that as much communication as possible that you can have with your niece or nephew is good. I was just thinking there's a very interesting dynamic on my dad's side of the family, that there are often better, like, uncles and there are better relationships with, like, the aunts and uncles than there are with the actual parents, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing, but it's just interesting because my dad was a better uncle to my cousins than he was a father to me and my brother. And I think sometimes, for some people, because they're not necessarily parents, and it wasn't just my father. Their own fathers were very crappy with them, or their own parents. They had my cousins had again just better parents with certain aunts, or better relationships with certain aunts than they did their own parents, which was just really, really interesting to me. And that just goes to, I wonder if that went to, like, lack of boundaries or lack of respect in a certain way. So I think it would be best to, like, kind of avoid that, like Noelle said. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do everything the same way the parents would, but and not trying to be that favorite uncle and just saying, hey, you can come up here and do whatever you want. We might want to kind of avoid that too. So, and it is good for kids to have a place where they can have that. If they can have, good relationships with both, then that's perfect. And it doesn't seem like, religion would be an issue here. And I agree with Claire that, just asking the parents whatever they need, especially once the baby is born, is going to be very, very helpful. I'm not sure, I don't remember how far away they are, but, as many visits as you can make as possible might be helpful too. And that would help with bonding with the child as well.
Yeah, the child will go through, you need child development, because the child will go through phases where they will be frightened of anybody that they don't spend a lot of time with. And that doesn't mean you give up and walk away, or that you're never going to be in again. There are distinct points in their development where they reject nearly everyone. Don't let that get to you. Learn how to approach babies. This is something I had to learn how to do. None of this was modeled for me, like I keep saying. So I had to learn how to approach babies so that they wanted to be around me. And I have my sister-in-law to thank for that. She was really a wonderful person to model after. So watch people who are good with children and see what they do, especially infants. And there's a lot you can learn. There are books out there, and just watching is a good thing too. Anything else, Mandisa? Mandisa? Are you there? I think she's probably dealing with
I'm
a child.
mute, sorry.
I figured I'm dealing with a child or something, keeping it real over there.
I was just saying, I'm here with my cat, my granddaughter, my little grand kitty. So
Right
the boys are downstairs just kind of doing their own thing. But I would just say best of luck, and
Enjoy.
congratulations. And
thank you.
And really, I hope that I wish the best for all of you.
Yeah.
That means a lot. Well, thank you all. I'll rewatch this, and I'll check out the resources you gave me. Thank
Right
you.
on.
Thanks
care.
for calling.
Okay.
Bye.
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 All righty. Oh, I'm so excited for him. That is such a good role to play, because you get to walk in and just love on the baby and help the parents, and that feels good. And it's just such good things. And watching them grow. You have the unique perspective of seeing snapshots. So when you're a parent, you may have experienced this too, where you're just living life, and then suddenly you look at your kid and you're like, oh my goodness, they're this much taller or whatever. Yeah. It's happening slowly, and so you don't maybe notice everything. But when somebody comes in and checks in every once in a while, they'll say, oh my gosh, your child has grown, or wow, they have so many words now, or whatever. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess they do. It's nice to have that that snapshot through things. It's just, I'm so excited for you. It's going to be so much fun.
Good on the parents too for making sure that their child is going to have other people in their life, in the child's life, to have relationships with, and thinking about who they want to be in their child's life, and kind of formalizing almost that relationship to make sure that that it's as much of a priority as they would like.
Right. Super cool. I am going to tell my Christmas story, and we're about out of time. So my son, when he was just a little guy, like 4 years old, he loved to take photographs. And we gave him a cell phone to take pictures with. And also, I had an SLR camera that I taught him how to be careful with it. He still managed to break it, but worth it. And he would take pictures. I would catch him in the bathroom with his dinosaurs, and they would be attacking one another, and then he would move them a little bit and then take that picture and move them a little bit and take a picture. And so he would have a series of pictures of the whole bloody fight. And he took some really amazing pictures. So we went to my in-laws for Christmas, and they have this really large nativity scene that they add to pretty much every year in some way or another. And I noticed him with a camera around the nativity scene, but I didn't pay much attention to it. And when I got home and downloaded the SLR camera, and you click through the pictures once in a while, and so here's a dinosaur in the middle of the nativity scene, or I should say really at the edge of it. And then the next image is the dinosaur prowling through the animals. And then it comes up next to the camel and looks at the camel. It's the whole progression. And then it approaches the creche. And the next picture is the dinosaur has the baby Jesus in his mouth. There's Rex. That's Rex. It wasn't Rex, but it was one of her sisters that did this horrible, horrible deed to the baby Jesus. So there it was, played out in all of its glory, the dinosaur stalking and eating the baby Jesus at my in-laws. And my husband and I just laughed our butts off at that. We thought that was just the most wonderful thing ever. Yeah. And I'm really glad my in-laws did not see him doing that. They would have had a heart attack, because they are that family that takes the little guys up to the nativity and says, okay, where's the baby Jesus? Let's find the baby Jesus.
Oh, God.
I mean, it's big. It's like mitochondrial level Jesus stuff. So, oh my gosh, they didn't see that, thank goodness. Anyhow, that's my Christmas story. Merry Christmas. Merry Dinosaur Christmas. Thank you so much, Mandisa, for calling in and being a part of this show. I always appreciate you. And Noelle, thanks for coming and being a special host. This was so great. Kendall couldn't be with us, and I'm so sorry she couldn't be. Probably, I'm going to guess it had something to do with being a mom. So,
yeah.
We will see you soon, Kendall. So we have a couple of Patreon people that I want to thank. There's Jonathan and Eric, each at the butterfly level. And then there's Janet Reyes and Maestro256 at the caterpillar level. So if you want to get mentioned on air, you too can sign up at Patreon. And I want to thank Philip Gunther for this graphic. It makes me smile ridiculously every time it starts up. I just love it. It makes me so happy. Thank you so much. And thank you to Mark and Vern and Josh on the phones on the other side of this wall. I love you all, and thank you so much for all the work that you do that makes this so incredibly easy for us to just walk in and talk. So I hope this show has helped you some small bit in parenting. It's really tough. We get that. And I hope this has helped. And right now, I think what you should do is go and hug your kid. Bye.